even outside of the world of vaccination conspiracy theories connected to autism or whatever else, mandatory vaccination remains pretty controversial. And starting next year in France, parents will be legally obligated to vaccinate their children from a variety of diseases. And there's already 3 mandatory vaccinations for kids in France for diphtheria, tetanus, and polio. Hepatitis and whooping cough were previously just recommended vaccines. And there's a new policy coming in France in 2018, which will add the 8 recommended vaccines to the list of mandatory vaccines. And there's been a similar initiative in Italy where non-vaccinated kids can't attend state schools. And a lot of this has to do with the measles outbreaks that we've seen around Europe and in the United States. And that is not unconnected to anti-vaccine sentiment, which has spread in different cultural enclaves. That is being partially blamed for these measles outbreaks. And a lot of this anti-vaccine sentiment, as we've explored in a long-form video, started with this discredited study, which said the MMR vaccine is connected to autism. The MMR vaccine is a vaccine against measles, mumps, and rubella. And we covered this extensively at the time. There was this Dr. Andrew Wakefield who wrote a totally fraudulent research paper in 1998 arguing that MMR is connected to autism. And this had a significant impact on vaccination rates. Now, this started to be questioned when his findings were completely not reproducible. It was later exposed that the study was scientifically bogus and that Wakefield actually had a financial conflict of interest. He was connected to an alternative to the MMR vaccine, a measles-only vaccine, which presumably would have benefited from people thinking, oh, the MMR vaccine causes autism, let me get this measles-only vaccine for my kid. And Andrew Wakefield was ultimately removed from the UK medical register. That's sort of like I guess you'd call it the UK equivalent of being a licensed doctor. So that's where a lot of this anti-vaxxer sentiment came from. Now, mandatory vaccination is controversial. Some states in the US say, if you want your kid in public school, you must vaccinate. But ultimately, you can choose not to vaccinate your kid if you're going to homeschool them, or if you find a private school that doesn't require vaccination, whatever the case may be. The arguments in favor of mandatory vaccination are, listen, we know vaccines save lives. Along with the antibiotics, vaccines are one of the greatest medical advancements of humanity. You need herd immunity through as close to total vaccination as possible. And you're also protecting people who can't get these vaccines because of an autoimmune issue or other health issue. But there are arguments against mandatory vaccination. You're talking about government intervention in medical choices, and that arguably should be a personal choice. You might be infringing in the US on constitutionally protected religious freedoms. The counter to that, Pat, is that most countries have laws against child abuse. And given the level at which vaccines now are successful for many of these conditions, you can make the case that not vaccinating is a form of child abuse.
Sure, but it also boils down to this argument of freedom versus public safety, and that can often be very difficult to weigh in on one way or another. And surprisingly, perhaps, France is one of the most skeptical countries when it comes to the safety of vaccines.
Correct.
Apparently, 41% disagree with the idea that they are safe, much more than in the United States at only 13.5%, and France actually ranks at number 1.
So this is the higher level view, which is, given the success of vaccines, it's stunning that there are even governments that feel like they need to make vaccines mandatory. And it's not, you're pointing at the exact issue, which is there is such anti-vaccine sentiment in France that it has become a public health issue, which has forced the government to take this issue up. And that's isn't that really the core of this problem?
And in a country with guaranteed health care, you can eliminate cost as the reason why they would be against vaccinating their children. That's exactly right. It's entirely just about sentiment and how they feel about them.
We will see what ultimately happens with this. Send me your thoughts. A lot of anti-vaxxers in our audience, and I know that they will get in touch with me.